My name is Michael Thomsen. I grew up in Denmark, but I lived all my adult life in Australia. I currently live in Tasmania, the island south of the mainland Australia, and it's a very beautiful place. I've been a herbalist and naturopath for nearly 40 years. I also have a PhD in medical sciences from the University of Sydney. And my biggest claim to fame is the Phytotherapy Desk Reference, which is both a book for students and practitioners of herbal medicine and an online application with herb-drug interactions and research, as well as traditional information about herbal medicine. So the main focus of my work now is to update the book and the application.
Now, Michael, something that ties back into ancient uses but comes from a different part of the world is Pelargonium. It has roots in traditional African medicine. And could you share a bit more about how different cultures used it historically, especially for respiratory health?
Yeah, so this is South African herb. And unfortunately, there's a treasure trove of medicinal plants in Africa and in South Africa, but very few of them have made it into our traditional practice, which I think is a shame. There are a few, Buku and others, but the herbal medicine tradition that we practice is known as Western herbal medicine, which I think is a bit annoying because I like to use herb from anywhere in the world as long as it has some good qualities and there's some good research to suggest its use and clinical research as well. So I like to use any herb, but historically people would either practice, this is in Australia and perhaps in Europe and the US now, would either study Indian Ayurvedic medicine or Persian Unani medicine or traditional Chinese herbal medicine or Western herbal medicine. And Western herbal medicine really became based around the herbs from North America and Europe. So it was because of this shared language, a lot of the herbal information from North America would come to Europe and eventually to Australia. So now we have this bad term, I think, but anyway, it's a term we have of Western herbal medicine. But we do try to incorporate different herbs into our practice. This particular one is one that's been very slow to come to Australia, and perhaps it's more well known in Europe. And again, it's due to European companies bringing that herb to Europe and doing research on it as well. But it's actually a Zulu medicine and also other ethnic groups of people in South Africa. And Onkoloba, I think in Africa, they have this clicking sound as well. I'm pretty sure there's a nice clicking sound as they pronounce that name. So it's also called Kaloba because it's easy to say for uneducated people like myself about this. But apparently this common name loosely translates to heavy cough and is traditionally used in disorders of the respiratory system with coughing. Other indications, traditional indications are dysentery, diarrhea, liver disorders, wounds, colds, fatigue, fevers, generalized weakness, and as I mentioned, infections of the respiratory tract, including tuberculosis. So a very big traditional use. And apparently English colonizers in South Africa really started to value this herb for the treatment of tuberculosis.
Tuberculosis, that's something nice to hear because the treatment and the battle for tuberculosis has lasted for a very long time. Do you think its respiratory benefits are the main reason, or is there more to how people might have used it?
Yeah, so again, it's both good and bad, but when a company picks up a new herb, they will have to pick one indication to promote that herb for. And I mentioned this in some of the other videos that this is a common trait. We saw that with black cohosh, that it has very good anti-rheumatic, anti-inflammatory properties, but these are not being used or applied or talked about very much because it became a herb for menopausal symptoms or for reproductive health in women. So sometimes when you do the narrowing, focusing on a particular indication and you do all the research on that indication, then you start to forget about the others. So in modern use at the moment, anyway, it's not really used very much for those other traditional indications I mentioned early on. It is very focused on the respiratory tract and infections of the respiratory tract and coughs and colds and that sort of thing. And it's probably due to the German company called Swabe, who developed an extract called 7630. And they got that approved in Europe for the common cold, for sinusitis and bronchitis, with the actions of being antimicrobial, so killing the infection, antiviral, and immune modulating. They went with that indication as the strongest indication, and that's become the common use of that herb today.
It sure is very interesting to hear. Lastly, are there any fun or unexpected uses that you may have came across while you were doing the research on Pelargonium?
I thought it was fairly new that it came to Europe or the US or the Americas, but it actually goes back a long way. I found this description of an Englishman called Charles Henry Stevens, and he'd claimed to have contracted tuberculosis in the 1890s. And after failing a cure to find a cure in England, he traveled to South Africa. And there he was treated by a medicine man who used this particular herb, Pelargonium. And he thought that worked so well for him that he took that product back to Europe and started marketing the remedy called Stevens Consumption Cure. His name was Charles Henry Stevens. So yeah, he marketed that the Stevens Consumption Cure, and apparently it became very popular. I guess there were no other good treatments for tuberculosis. People were keen to find something new. So that was the early commercialization in Europe of this plant. And the other thing, of course, is that it is a danger of all herbal medicines. When they become really popular, then there's a big pressure on the plant in its native country. Because of this, it became a threatened species in South Africa, but there are luckily now cultivations underway for the supply of the raw material for this product. And lastly, in some South African communities, the herb is still affectionately known as Granny's remedy due to its long-standing use passed down through generations. So it's a real home remedy for respiratory tract infections and colds and flus and so on.
I see. That is definitely a very interesting origin and folklore. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.